Europe looks calm. Its cities still operate. Its institutions still function. On the surface, this appears to be one of the most successful regions in human history. Wealthy, stable, educated. But beneath that surface, the foundations are shifting. Across the continent, birth rates have fallen so far that most European countries are no longer producing enough children to replace their own populations. In places like Italy and Spain, fertility has dropped below 1.3 children per woman. Levels once associated with crisis, now sustained for decades. The consequences are already visible on the map. In cities like Milan, the population is aging rapidly despite economic strength. In parts of eastern Germany, schools have closed not because of budget cuts, but because there are no children left to fill classrooms. Across rural Italy, entire villages shrink year after year, while hospitals and care homes struggle to find staff. Then there's the trend behind it all. For more than 60 years, Europe's birth rates have moved in one direction: down. Once they fell below replacement level, they never recovered. Recessions came and went. Governments changed, policies shifted, the line kept falling. This isn't about a single war, protest, or political crisis dominating the headlines. Those events matter, but they are not the core problem. Europe isn't facing a sudden collapse. It's facing something slower and more dangerous: the sustained collapse of birth rates across nearly the entire continent. And what makes this especially serious is that Europe already tried to fix this problem, and may have locked itself into a path that is now extremely difficult to reverse. So the real question isn't whether Europe is changing, it's what happens when an entire continent stops replacing itself, and only realises the consequences decades later. Demographers use a simple benchmark to measure whether a society can sustain itself over time: the replacement rate. To keep a population stable, each woman needs to have around 2.1 children. That number accounts for mortality and ensures that one generation fully replaces the next. Europe is far below that threshold. Across the European Union, fertility now ranges from about 1.7 in France to 1.4 in Germany to around 1.2 in Italy. These are not temporary dips caused by recessions or pandemics. As the United Nations puts it, sustained low fertility leads to population decline and rapid population ageing, with profound economic and social consequences. In most of Europe, birth rates have remained below replacement since the 1970s. Demographic change moves slowly, but once it gains momentum, it becomes extremely difficult to reverse. Each year of low fertility compounds the next. Smaller generations replace larger ones. Fewer children today mean fewer workers tomorrow, and even fewer parents after that. The consequences are already visible in population pyramids across the continent. What once looked like a broad base of young people supporting a smaller, elderly population has begun to invert. The working age population is shrinking, while the number of retirees continues to grow, driven by rising life expectancy. Even if birth rates were to increase tomorrow, the damage would already be locked in. The people who would have filled classrooms, factories, and offices over the next 2 decades were never born. Europe is no longer approaching a demographic cliff. It has already stepped over the edge, and the fall is unfolding in slow motion. Europe is not alone in facing demographic decline. Birth rates are falling across most advanced economies. The United States, Japan, and South Korea are all aging societies, but Europe is structurally more exposed, and the data shows why. The median age of the European Union is now around 44 to 45 years, with Italy exceeding at 48. In the United States, it is closer to 38 to 39. That gap may sound small, but at a population level, it represents tens of millions more people already past their prime working years. The difference becomes even clearer when looking at dependency. Europe's old age dependency ratio, the number of people aged 65 plus relative to those of working age, has risen to roughly 34 retirees per 100 working age adults. In the United States, that figure is still closer to 28 per 100. Europe also faces a sharper decline in its workforce. Across much of the continent, The working age population has already peaked and is now shrinking. Each new cohort entering the labour market is smaller than the one retiring year after year. This combination matters. Ageing alone is manageable. Shrinkage alone can be absorbed. But Europe is experiencing both at the same time and earlier than most comparable economies. Demographic decline may be global, but Europe is carrying the heaviest load first. Europe's welfare states were built for a very different demographic reality. After World War II, most European systems were designed around a simple assumption: a large and growing workforce supporting a small retired population. Pensions, healthcare and social services were funded on a pay-as-you-go basis, relying on the contributions of current workers rather than long-term savings. That balance no longer exists. As birth rates declined and life expectancy rose, the ratio between workers and retirees began to collapse. In 1990 Germany, there were about 4 workers per retiree. Today there are just over 2, and many countries in Europe follow that pattern. The financial consequences are significant. In France alone, public pension spending already absorbs around 14 to 15% of GDP, before healthcare costs are even counted. Healthcare spending rises sharply with age, meaning older populations require disproportionately more medical care, long-term treatment, and social support. To compensate, governments have begun raising retirement ages, increasing payroll taxes, or borrowing more, but these measures shift the burden rather than remove it. Fewer workers are being asked to contribute more, for longer, to support a growing non-working population. This creates a structural squeeze. Higher taxes reduce disposable income. Later retirement delays job turnover. Rising debt limits future spending flexibility. The welfare state itself is not collapsing, but it is being stretched beyond the demographic conditions it was designed to survive. As Europe's birth rates collapsed and workforces began to shrink, governments faced a choice. They could confront the deeper causes of demographic decline: soaring housing costs, delayed family formation, unaffordable childcare, and economic insecurity, reforms that would take decades to show results. Or they could choose a shortcut. They chose migration. On paper, it looked like the perfect solution. Millions of new workers entering the labour market, a broader tax base, immediate relief for ageing societies. And for a time, it worked. In many years, net migration into the European Union exceeded 1 to 2 million people, becoming the main reason Europe's population didn't start shrinking sooner. But the trade-off came later. Migration did not reverse Europe's demographic decline. Fertility rates among migrants consistently fall toward native levels within 1 or 2 generations, as families adapt to the same high-cost, urban, dual-income reality. The demographic math stayed the same, only delayed. What did change was daily life. Rapid population growth placed enormous pressure on housing, driving shortages and rising rents. Public services, schools, healthcare, transport, struggled to keep up. Integration outcomes varied sharply, and in many cities this produced visible social tension, parallel communities, and localized increases in crime. In 2023, Ulf Kristersson, Sweden's Prime Minister, acknowledged this directly, saying,
"Det här är en svår tid för Sverige."
For many Europeans, this wasn't an abstract policy debate. It was something they felt, in crowded neighbourhoods, strained services, and a sense that decisions were being made faster than societies could absorb. The shortcut bought time, but it also reshaped Europe in ways that are proving far harder to control than the original problem governments tried to avoid. Demographics don't just change societies, they change economies, mechanically. When the working age population shrinks, economic growth slows. In the European Union, the number of people aged 20 to 64 has already peaked and is now declining. Over the next 2 decades, Europe is expected to lose tens of millions of working age adults, even under optimistic migration scenarios. Italy alone is projected to lose 6 to 7 million working age adults by 2050. That directly affects growth. Over the past 20 years, average annual GDP growth in the EU has hovered around 1 to 1.5%, compared to roughly 2 to 2.5% in the United States. A major reason is demographics: fewer workers entering the economy each year and more leaving it. Productivity can offset this, but only partially. Even strong productivity growth cannot fully compensate for a shrinking labour force. As a result, Europe's potential growth rate has steadily declined, meaning the economy struggles to expand even during stable periods. At the same time, public spending rises. Pension and healthcare costs increase sharply with age. Across much of Europe, public pension spending already accounts for 10 to 15% of GDP, while total public debt in several major countries now exceeds 100% of GDP. The burden concentrates on fewer people. Payroll taxes and income taxes rise, retirement ages are pushed higher, and younger workers are asked to contribute more to systems that were designed when there were far more contributors per retiree. This feeds back into the demographic problem itself. Higher taxes reduce disposable income. Slower growth limits opportunity. Housing affordability worsens. Family formation is delayed, pushing birth rates even lower. What began as a demographic shift becomes an economic trap. Not a sudden crash, but a slow tightening, year after year, as fewer people are asked to carry more weight. Faced with collapsing birth rates, European governments have tried to intervene. Over the past decades, billions have been spent on child benefits, tax credits, subsidised childcare, and extended parental leave. The results have been limited. Across the OECD, a group of high-income countries with comparable living standards, even the most generous family policies still fail to restore replacement-level birth rates. France, often cited as a success story, spends roughly 3 to 4% of GDP on family benefits, yet its fertility rate has fallen back toward 1.7 and below. In Scandinavia, where parental leave and childcare support are among the most extensive in the world, birth rates have also declined sharply in recent years. The deeper forces are structural. Urbanisation strongly correlates with low fertility. In large European cities, birth rates are often 20 to 30% lower than national averages. Rising housing costs delay family formation. Across much of Europe, the average age of first childbirth has climbed to 30 or higher, leaving fewer fertile years for larger families. History suggests recovery is rare. Once fertility drops below roughly 1.6 births per woman, sustained rebounds are uncommon, even with aggressive policy intervention. Japan and South Korea offer clear examples. Decades of incentives have failed to restore replacement-level birth rates. Demography moves slowly, but it locks in quickly. Policies can soften the decline, but they rarely reverse it once social and economic conditions have changed. At this stage, European governments are no longer trying to restore birth rates to replacement levels. They are trying to manage the consequences of a future that is already largely set. Long before modern welfare states or industrial economies, societies already face the consequences of demographic decline. One of the clearest examples comes from the late period of the Roman Empire. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, Roman administrators were documenting falling birth rates among citizens, widespread rural depopulation, and a shrinking tax base. Census records and tax registers show fewer small landowners, abandoned farms, and declining populations outside major cities. Fewer people meant less food surplus, fewer taxpayers, and growing pressure on those who remained. To compensate, the state increased taxation, tied workers to land, and relied more heavily on substitutes, enslaved labour, mercenaries, and auxiliary forces, to fill gaps the native population could no longer supply. These measures stabilised the system temporarily, but they also made it more rigid and less resilient. Importantly, Rome did not weaken because of a single invasion or sudden collapse. It weakened over generations as demographic decline quietly reduced economic capacity, administrative flexibility, and social cohesion. Technology, borders, and political systems change, but demography doesn't. When populations shrink and age faster than societies can adapt, the strain builds long before collapse becomes visible. By 2050, Europe's demographic future will not arrive as a shock. As Dubravka Šuica, the European Commissioner for Demography, has warned that Europe is entering a period of rapid population ageing and a shrinking workforce, with serious consequences for economic growth and public finances. Population projections show that large parts of Europe will have fewer people than today, even with continued migration. In several countries, the working-age population is expected to shrink by 15 to 25%, while the number of people over 65 continues to rise. Daily life will quietly change. Waiting longer for medical appointments won't be an exception. It will be standard. Public transport routes will be reduced outside major cities. Local services will disappear, not because governments cut them, but because there aren't enough users or staff to sustain them. Entire regions will age in place. Smaller towns will hollow out as younger people concentrate in a handful of economic centres. Political power will tilt further toward older voters, reinforcing policies that protect pensions and healthcare. While investment in growth, housing, and families becomes harder to justify, this won't feel like collapse. It will feel like permanent shortage, slow emotion, and lowered expectations, year after year. And the most important detail remains unchanged. There is no policy today that can alter who will be 30 years old in 2050. Europe's demographic crisis has no single villain. No law caused it, no election triggered it, no single decision can be blamed. Birth rates didn't collapse overnight. They declined quietly year by year, generation by generation, as societies grew richer, older, and more urban. And that is what makes this crisis so difficult to confront. Demographics don't respond to speeches or emergency plans. They move slowly, then lock in. By the time the consequences become visible, the decisions that caused them are already decades old. Europe is not collapsing because money suddenly disappeared. It is accumulating debt because fewer people are left to sustain the system. The institutions built in the 20th century were designed for growth. More workers, more taxpayers, more families. The 21st century is delivering the opposite. From here, policy can manage decline. It can redistribute pressure. It can delay consequences, but it cannot rewind time. The future Europe is moving toward will not arrive with a single shock, but as a permanent adjustment to absence. And the most decisive moment already passed quietly. The year birth rates fell below replacement and never recovered.